Order in the court! The sharp crack of the judge's gavel echoed like thunder across the packed courtroom. The murmurs died instantly. Dozens of eyes, curious, doubtful, even amused, shifted toward the front, where a boy no older than 16 stood. He looked so out of place it was almost laughable. His thin frame seemed swallowed by the massive wooden panels of the courtroom. His t-shirt was plain, wrinkled, and utterly unlike the polished suits worn by the lawyers around him. But what stood out most were his eyes, focused, determined, and unshaken, despite the weight of judgment pressing down on him. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a face carved with years of authority, raised a skeptical eyebrow. He leaned forward, peering down at the teenager as if trying to solve a puzzle. Then, with a scoff that carried across the room, he said, "What is this? Some kind of joke? Why is a teenager standing before me instead of a lawyer?" His tone was dripping with sarcasm, and it drew the reaction he expected. The crowd chuckled softly, their laughter bouncing off the marble walls. Some shook their heads, others exchanged knowing glances, as though they had just been given a front-row seat to a guaranteed disaster. To them, the boy didn't belong. This was a courtroom, serious, intimidating, unforgiving. It was no place for a child. He looked fragile, almost breakable, as if one stern word would send him running for the door. But the boy didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He stood his ground, shoulders squared, his gaze fixed on the judge. There was something in his expression, a quiet fire, that set him apart from the mocking crowd. The judge noticed it too, though he dismissed it quickly. "Well," the judge pressed, "do you even understand where you are? This isn't a classroom debate. This is the law, boy." The boy's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile, though his voice stayed calm and steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I know exactly where I am, and I know exactly why I'm here." Gasps rippled through the audience. Whispers flared like sparks in dry grass. "Does he think he's really going to argue here?" one man muttered under his breath. "He's going to embarrass himself," another woman whispered, stifling a laugh. Even the opposing attorney, a seasoned professional in a perfectly tailored suit, smirked from his side of the courtroom. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes glinting with amusement. To him, this wasn't a trial anymore, it was a free victory. But what none of them knew, what not even the judge had the slightest idea about, was that this boy was no ordinary teenager. He wasn't here by mistake. He wasn't here on a dare, or because he had stumbled into something too big for him. Number. He had been preparing for this very moment in ways no one could imagine. For years, while kids his age played games and worried about homework, this boy spent his nights buried in books thicker than most could lift. He memorized cases, studied laws, and trained his mind to think sharper than a blade. His memory was flawless, his arguments airtight. He had taught himself to analyze every detail, to spot lies where others saw truth, to unravel the most complex legal knots with ease. And now, at just 16, he was ready to reveal it all. The judge leaned back, shaking his head. "This is absurd." "Absolutely absurd," he muttered. But something about the boy's unwavering stance made him pause. This wasn't the shaky confidence of a kid trying to act brave. This was something else. Something real. The audience, though still amused, began to sense the tension in the air. The laughter grew quieter, replaced by curiosity. What if, just maybe, this boy had more to offer than they assumed? The boy cleared his throat, his voice ringing clearly across the hushed room. "I may not look like the lawyers you're used to seeing, Your Honor. I may not wear a suit or carry decades of experience, but I've studied this case. I've studied the law, and I'm here to prove the truth." The room fell silent. The smirk slipped from the opposing attorney's face. The whispers stopped. Even the judge who had mocked him moments ago found himself leaning in, studying the boy more carefully. Nobody knew it yet, but the courtroom was about to witness something unforgettable. Because this wasn't just a teenager standing before the law. This was a genius in disguise, finally stepping into the spotlight. And what happened next would leave every single person in that room stunned. The boy took a slow, steady breath, then introduced himself with remarkable calmness. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying more strength than anyone expected. "My name is David. I'll be representing the defendant in this case." A wave of disbelief swept across the courtroom. Heads turned, eyes widened, and whispers shot through the gallery like a sudden storm. The idea was unthinkable, a teenager standing where seasoned lawyers battled for justice. The judge nearly laughed out loud. His lips curled into a mocking smirk. "Representing? You." His voice was thick with disbelief. Leaning forward, he peered down at David as though inspecting an insect. "This is a courtroom, not a school debate team. Do you even know the law? Or are you here to waste everyone's time?" The courtroom erupted in quiet snickers. People covered their mouths, trying not to laugh too loudly, but their amusement filled the room like smoke. Some shook their heads in pity. Others whispered harsh predictions. "He's going to humiliate himself," one woman murmured. "Poor kid doesn't even stand a chance," another muttered. At the defense table, the defendant, an anxious man whose future hung in the balance, looked at David with a mix of doubt and desperation. Could this boy really protect him? Or was his fate sealed the moment the teenager opened his mouth? Across the room, the opposing attorney sat tall and confident. His suit was sharp, his posture relaxed, and his expression smug. Years of courtroom victories had made him arrogant, and this moment only fed his ego. Watching David was like watching a child walk into a lion's den. The attorney smirked, certain the trial was already his to claim. But David didn't flinch. He didn't shrink under the weight of their laughter, their judgment, or their doubts. He stood tall, his voice calm but firm, echoing with conviction. "I may be young," David declared, "but I know this case inside and out, and I will prove the truth no matter what." The gallery fell into a hush. The boy's words rang with such certainty that for just a moment people stopped laughing. The judge leaned back in his chair, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Fine," he said at last, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Since you insist, let's see how long you last before embarrassing yourself." He waved a hand as though dismissing the matter. "Proceed." The atmosphere shifted. The crowd leaned in, eager to witness the impending disaster. Some expected David to stumble over legal terms, to freeze under pressure, or to crumble when challenged. They were ready to laugh again, ready to watch the boy's confidence dissolve into humiliation. But what happened next would shock them all. David picked up a file from the defense table, his hands steady. He flipped it open, scanning the contents with practiced precision. Then, in a clear, commanding tone, he addressed the court. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to call attention to the timeline of events submitted by the prosecution." The opposing attorney smirked, leaning back lazily. "And what exactly does the student council president have to say about it?" he teased, drawing a few chuckles from the audience. David ignored the insult. He walked toward the evidence display, his steps purposeful. Holding up a page, he pointed to the corner. "This timestamp doesn't align with the official record. In fact, it places the defendant in a location that contradicts the prosecution's own witness statement." The judge blinked, caught off guard. He adjusted his glasses, leaning forward to inspect the document. The room, once filled with muffled laughter, grew utterly silent. David's voice didn't waver. "If the prosecution's timeline is flawed, then the entire foundation of their argument collapses. And that, Your Honor, is not just a mistake, it's evidence of tampering." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The smug smile drained from the opposing attorney's face. He snatched the paper, scanning it furiously, but the flaw was undeniable. The judge looked from the document to David, his expression shifting from mockery to cautious respect. For the first time, he saw not a child, but a mind sharper than most adults who had ever stood in that room. The gallery leaned forward, stunned. The boy who had been laughed at, ridiculed, and mocked was now commanding the courtroom with intelligence and confidence that none of them had expected. And in that moment, the judge realized this wasn't going to be the disaster everyone predicted. No, this trial was about to become unforgettable. The trial began in earnest, and the seasoned attorney wasted no time making his move. He rose with the confidence of a man who had won countless battles in that very courtroom. His suit was immaculate, his tone sharp, and his delivery smooth like polished steel. Almost immediately, he launched into complicated legal jargon, weaving through statutes and codes with dizzying speed. His strategy was clear: bury David under an avalanche of technical terms, overwhelm him with years of experience, and crush his spirit before the boy even had a chance to stand. The crowd nodded knowingly. "That's it," someone whispered. "The kid's done for." But David didn't falter. He stood tall, his posture calm, his expression focused. When the attorney finished his barrage and smirked triumphantly, David simply adjusted the papers in his hand and replied with clear, precise language that cut through the noise like a blade.